Might take some time to get used to this, but this video here is the solutions to your guided instruction if you finished in class, and it's also extra practice, explaining some extra things that you need to kind of keep in mind, give you some extra thought on some things to help you get better at the skill you're looking at. The first thing we are going to do is look at the guided instruction questions so that you can see whether you did them right or did them wrong or whatever it might be. The first thing we want to know about the vertex of the graph, if you remember again, the vertex of the graph is the point where it turns, and it's either the bottom or top of the hill. The vertex in this situation is right here, and the coordinates of that is x going back 2 and y going down 3. That should have been the coordinate that you used. Whether it's a minimum or a maximum, notice how everything is above this line, and so therefore it would be a low point, which makes it a minimum. So those would be the two things that you should have said there. For number 2, they wanted us to graph the function y is equal to negative 3x squared, and so the first thing we had to do was make a table. I hope you made a table. If you did not, then you did not do it right, and what I said was to use 0 for right now. We'll talk about how that works somewhere else, but for right now 0 is the number that you will use, and you just kind of want to fill it in around there. So we will plug in 0, negative 3 times 0 squared, which is of course 0. Let's try 1 by doing second enter, turning that into a 1. Notice that we get the answer of negative 3. So we can use 1, and then let's try 2, which gives me an answer of negative 12. And because I'm counting this way, I want to go negative 1, negative 2 this way. So I want to go negative 3 times negative 1 squared, which, if you notice again the pattern, these two things match. And then I'll do negative 2 by doing second enter, turning that negative 1 into a negative 2. And again, notice you get the same answer there as well. And so when you go to graph this, 0, 0 of course being here, 1, negative 3 is here. You really can't get to negative 12 because it's going to be somewhere down there, so we don't need to worry about it. But we can do negative 1, negative 3, remembering again that it's shaped like a U. And because this is a negative 3, we know it's going to be upside down, which means it's going to be shaped something like this. And again, you will get better at this as you work through it, so just make sure you're being patient as you do that. But that is the table, that is the graph that you're looking for on that question. Then when it asks you number 3, from widest to narrowest, the easiest way to do this is to remember what I told you in terms of the pattern that we found out, which is that the smaller number is wide and that the bigger number is narrow. And we can ignore the signs in this case if you remember from before. So you're looking at a 1 here, because even though it's negative, I'm just going to use a positive 1, a 3 here, and a 1/3 there. Well, if you want the widest, that means the smallest number should be most wide. We have a 1, a 3, and a 1/3. After you graph that, your widest should have been 1/3 x squared first. Your second smallest number is going to be negative x squared, because of course that's going to be your 1. And then your biggest or most narrowest should be 3x squared. So what we can do real fast, just to make sure that works, I always train you to do this, is to kind of check your answers. So we go to our y equals and we type them in. 1/3 of course being in parentheses, x squared, negative x squared here, and then 3x squared last. And if we did this right, we should notice that each of these graphs get more and more narrow as we go. Let's see. That one seems to be pretty wide. This is definitely more narrow. And the third one is definitely more narrow than the third one. So that is the answer that you should have got, which is 1/3 x squared, negative x squared, and 3x squared as you work through those. But other than that, let's look at this guided practice here and see what's going on. It's asking us to match each function with the graph. It gives us x squared minus 1, negative 3x squared plus 8, and negative 0.2x squared plus 5. The reason I gave you this question is because there is a way to answer this without doing anything at all. but using your common sense. We haven't learned about this number yet, but we'll learn about that tomorrow. But let's just ignore those numbers because we really don't need them. The numbers that we're going to focus on is the x squared term because it tells us everything we need. The first thing I notice is that this is positive, so this should open up. This is negative, so this should open down. And this is negative, so this should also open down. And if you look at your three options, there's only one graph that opens up, and that is B. So that means that this one here is B. So taking that graph out, because this obviously belongs to this one, you now have two options here. And again, we can use our common sense, kind of like what I told you yesterday in class. Use your common sense here to recognize that this is smaller, this is bigger. Negative 3, even just ignoring the numbers, 3 is bigger than 0.2. Again, ignore the negatives. 3 is bigger than 0.2. And so because of that, this should be more narrow. This should be more wide. And if you're looking at the 2 here, that means that since this should be more wide, that is your C graph. And this, of course, is your A graph. So let's look at this real fast just to make sure. F of x is equal to x squared minus 1 is what that said. And let's make sure that the graph that we have looks similar to B, just to make sure. And if you look at it, that is about the same picture. So I think it matches. The second one, going back to your y equals, clearing that out, negative 3x squared plus 8. Again, I said that this was A. Let's see if these two things look to be about the same. And if you look, that is about the same, which means that the last one should be true also, in which it was negative 0.2 x squared plus 5, I believe is what it said in the beginning. And let's see if it looks just like the one right next to it. And as you can see, the pictures are pretty similar. So we did make a good pick just by using common sense without having to go through the graphing part. Again, that's part of what you're going to be asked to do in this unit, is use the information. You have to remember again that if this is a negative number attached to x squared, it opens down. Positive opens up. Numbers that are bigger than 1, like 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, are more narrow. Numbers smaller than 1, like 0.5, 0.8, any fractions are going to be more wide. And that's important for you. Looking at question number 2, it says order each group from widest to narrowest. Again, what we have learned, and this is the key thing, is that the widest is going to be the smallest number. And so if you're looking at 3x squared, 2x squared, and 4x squared, the widest is going to be the smallest number. So 2x squared should be the widest. Of course, 3x squared would be next, and 4x squared should be last if you had to pick. Let's just check real fast. 2x squared, 3x squared, and 4x squared. And again, this should get wide to more narrow as we go. So 1, 2, and 3. Notice how it just kind of stacked on the inside, but yes, that is what we're looking for. When you go to B, again, when you want to know wide versus narrow, ignore the negative, just use the numbers. Imagine this as a 5, imagine this as a 3, the absolute value of that, and remember, if there's nothing, imagine this as a 1. The most wide one should be the smallest number out of all of them, and so this should be first, x squared. Second should be the 3, so negative 3x squared, and last should be the 5, which is 5x squared. So again, let's type those in and see how they work. You have x squared first, you have negative 3x squared second, and you have 5x squared third. Let's see if that works to be wide to narrow. That's wide. That's definitely narrow. And if you look at that, that is actually more narrow than the third, so we got that one right as well. And then looking at C, again, ignoring this, you have 1/2, you have 5, you have 1/4. When it comes to fractions, think about it like a pizza. If you break a pizza into halves and you eat half of a pizza, this is how much pizza you got. If you eat 1/4 of a pizza, this is how much pizza you got. So the smaller of the two would be the 1/4, which means that that should be the widest. So we're looking at negative 1/4 x squared as the widest of the three. The next, because that's a whole number, should be the 1/2 or negative 1/2 x squared, which should be next, and then the last and most narrow should be 5x squared. So let's again look at this just to verify it. So negative 1/4 x squared first, negative 1/2 x squared second, and 5x squared third. And again, if this is going the way it's supposed to go, this should start out wide and get more and more narrow as we go. There is your first one. Second one, notice it's more narrow, and your third, of course, as you see, is more narrow than the other two. So yes, we got those two right also. The last question that I'm going to talk about before we call it quits is one of the application problems that teachers love to talk about with parabolas. It says a person's riding a hot air balloon 154 feet above the ground. He drops an apple. The height h is given by that formula where t is the time in seconds. They want to know how long it's going to take for the apple to hit the ground. The best way to answer this question is to make a table, t being the time, h being the height. And let's think for a second, if you're talking realistically, t should not be negative because you can't have negative time. That means it would be a second before you dropped it that it would hit the ground, which is impossible. So what I will do is I will start out by just counting by regular numbers, 1, 2, and see what happens. So take the t, and let's plug in negative 16 times 0 plus 154, and I get 154. Take this again, second enter. Remember, you can bring that back, turn the 0 into a 1, and get 138. So it is dropping. Notice that the height is going down. Then I do second enter, turn this 1 into a 2. I get 122. So it's still dropping. Let's try 3. The reason that you want to learn how to program it is so it doesn't take so long for you to keep typing in different numbers. Now it's at 106. Sorry. Second enter, turn this into a 4. It's at 90. I don't think I need to continue this part here. What I will do instead, because I think that I'm getting the pattern, is that I'll just keep going. I'll just pick a number like 6. Notice that 6 is still not enough. Let's try 8. 8 is still 26 feet above the ground based off of what that means. Let's try 10. Well, 10 is at 2,000 feet. No, because it's negative, it's 2,000 feet below. So let's go back and actually, hold on, I think I messed up. Negative 16 times 10 squared plus 154. I think what I messed up on is I took the parentheses away. But anyway, looking at that, that's 1,400 feet below ground. So we will go back to 9. So negative 16 times 9 squared plus 154. And notice that I am way down there. So I think it's somewhere around 8 seconds. So let's see, negative 16 times 8 squared plus 154. That makes no sense to me. I think I messed up somehow. So let's go back. Negative 16 times 2, or times 1 squared, plus 154 is 138, which is the first mistake that I see that I made, because things did not make sense. So negative 16 times 1 squared plus that would be 138. Now let's try 2. That should have been 90. We all make mistakes. Negative 16 times 3 squared plus 154 is at 10 feet. And I don't think that 4 is going to be necessary. Notice this is at negative 102. And so if you're talking about when it hits the ground, it's 154 feet here, 138 feet dropping, 90, 10, 102. It's somewhere between 3 and 4. And so what you could do now is you can kind of start narrowing in. So negative 16 times, let's go 3.5 squared plus 154. And notice this is below the ground. So we can now turn that 3.5 into 3.3. Still too far. We can take that 3.3 and make it 3.1. And notice that it's still slightly above the ground. 3.2 is way below the ground, so the answer that I would pick is 3.1 seconds. Trial and error, as long as you understand how to find it. Eventually we will teach you how to solve this, but for right now, if you see that question on the quiz next week, that is what you're being asked to do, is just pretty much to kind of fight your way through it, plug some numbers in and see what's going on. Show me some work to make sure that you give me the spot where it crosses. Notice that I showed you with 3 and 4 is where it goes from 10 above to negative 102, and then I pick the number that works best for it. So outside of that, again, make sure you're getting something out of this stuff. Make sure you're practicing this. And if there's any questions that you have or what's going on, please make sure you speak up. Ask someone around you, ask me, so we can make sure we're getting this thing taken care of.